Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be sharing a few tips with you on how to, first of all, draw really nice smooth petals like in this pink flower, and also some tips on how to create your own cute little fuzzy bee here. So if that's something that you are wanting to add to your work, carry on watching. Before we get into this though, I do just want to mention that the full tutorial of this is available over on my Patreon. The reference photo for this is actually one of my own, so the only way that you can recreate this drawing is by popping on over there. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. So first of all, we're going to start with the flower. You can see that I have just gently outlined. I've used my lightest pink pencil, which was a light magenta in this case, just really gently outlined, and then I am adding in some shading using the same pencil. I've also added in some definition where the petal kind of folds with a slightly darker pink, but I'm adding in some shading using the lightest pencil first. Then I'm going in with my kind of mid-tones, so I'm using some crimson, some middle purple, pink to build up where the shadows are. So the light magenta tone in this particular petal here is going to be used as the highlights in the petal, so where the light is catching and the lightest areas. And then I'm building up the mid-tones and going towards more of those darker reds where we have the shadow, which is more towards the base of the petal where it is going into the center of the flower there. So you can see I'm really layering up. I'm using many layers of all of these different red tones, and to create the super dark shadow right into that center, I'm going in and using some dark indigo, which is a blue, which you might think is a little bit strange, but adding blue and red together as well as red and green creates this really nice dark shadow tone. You can see it's really nice and deep, and using a blue rather than using a brown just helps to create a bit more of a luminous shadow, a bit more of a luminous colour. In the highlights there, I'm going in and using my Holbein soft white pencil. I really love this white pencil to really smooth out these lighter areas and to smooth out layers in general. The waxiness of that pencil really gets into the tooth of the paper and just creates a really nice smooth surface, and it just ends up looking really nice when using that pencil. Moving on to the petals underneath and the other ones, so I've followed exactly the same process. So I've used my lightest pencil first, that is going to be there to capture any of those highlights and anything showing through. Then I'm working up through my red tones, pink tones, and getting more towards the kind of dark reds and adding in any blue tones as well for the shadows. I also like to use my mid-tones to create any kind of distinguishing lines that you can see running through petals. So petals are really smooth in their surface, so I tend to use a lot of layers and a little bit, you can see here with the white pencil, I'm using a circular motion to try and help to convey that smooth surface. And then I will go in with a sharp pencil of a deeper colour to add any kind of textural elements that you can see on the petals. So if you look closely up on petals, you can sometimes see the little veins and everything running through there. So that's what I like to add with a really sharp, kind of more towards a darker tone of the pencil. You can see in action here where I'm using some of the darker tones to add in some of the distinguishing lines, and then going in and adding in all of those dark shadows. Once again, that blue is back in action. You can see as I start to add more petals just how nicely the blue works in terms of a shadow. As I said, if I was to use browns or anything, I think that the reds would end up looking quite muddy, and that's something that I really want to avoid and that you should avoid in your work as well, is muddy looking colours. And the way that you would do that is just not to introduce too many browns and other tones. Coming into the bee here, first thing that I've done is added in his little antennae by using a sharp, first of all, some dark indigo, and I did go over with some dark sepia to really get that kind of black dark tone. And then I'm using some raw umber and some beester to add in the head. So the head of this bumblebee is completely black, and you can see his little eye as well. And I'm using the brown tones as the base because bumblebees and bees, as you know, are generally dark stripes and yellow stripes, or slightly more reddy orange stripes. And I like to add a brown as a base to the darker areas, because then that's going to tie in nicely to the yellow or the kind of orangey red hues that you've got flowing through the rest of the bumblebee. You could also use yellows as an undertone here, but because I am adding in quite a bit of blue for my shadows, I don't want the shadows to look green. I want them to stay kind of more on the warmer tone of things, so I've used the brown as the base here, and then I'm adding in some dark indigo and some walnut brown and some of those darker browns over the top, and then finally going over with some dark sepia. And now we can add in the little yellow stripes to create the fuzzy effect. You can see the motion that I'm using with the pencil. I'm using little lines and building them up over the top of one another and following the curvature of the bee as well. This is really important, otherwise your bee is going to look really flat. So you want to make sure that you do follow the curvature of the bee, because he is a 3D object. And you want to make sure that you're using lots of these little lines so that you can create that really fluffy texture. And I'm keeping them really quite small as well, because this is a very small subject. He's got very small features and small structure, so keeping your pencil lines really short will help to convey that really dense kind of fluffiness as well on the bee. And again, on the darker areas here, you can see I've used some of those brown tones as a base, and when you're adding in the stripes further along, you can use this brown colour to come backwards into the yellow to create a really nice overlap. You can see it's working really well on the top half of the bee there, and on the underside here I'm just using exactly the same technique, adding in the brown base using some of those lines, making sure that I go both in the direction of the way that the fuzz is flowing and backwards in the direction of the fuzz when you get that overlap between those lighter and darker colours. That's really important because that's going to help to create a natural looking overlap. I'm also making sure that I am concentrating a lot of the shadows to underneath the wings, and that's going to help the wings look a little bit more prominent on the body, and generally you find a lot more kind of shading there as well where something is overlapping like that. For the legs, I'm using exactly the same method, except instead of using a base of the raw umber or the bee star, I'm just going straight in with some walnut brown, going in with some dark indigo as well, and then going over with some dark sepia. So I'm kind of negating the base colour on the legs purely because there are no other really surrounding colours and they're really dark, and to help to get that really dark tone I'm just going in with straight away with those darker colours in there. I'm also using my Holbein soft white pencil to create a few highlights and everything on the eyes and a few of the hairs sticking off of the legs as well. I always find with the Holbein soft white that it is quite difficult to get a nice sharp point, so if you want to use another sharp white pencil that's going to get you those highlights, or even a white gel pen, then feel free to go ahead and do that. It's going to work exactly the same. The wings of the bee are one of the more intricate and kind of more difficult to convey parts. What you want to do here is make sure that you have some really good contrast. So you want to have some dark lines running through. That's going to be like the veins of the wings, and you want the rest of the wings to be like this kind of translucent kind of effect. And the way to do that is just to use some light layers of your colours that are underneath your bee, because you're going to have those colours reflected through, and then go over with a white pencil to make sure that they're really nice and smooth and blended, but just to make sure that you do have some really dark defining lines through there. And I've actually used a white gel pen to help to go through and add some highlights, and it just helps them look a little bit more kind of not wet, but they look like they're catching the light a lot more. So that's a tip to use there. Don't be afraid to use gel pens or any other things with your coloured pencil work, by the way. So now we're going back to the flower, because the bee is completely done, and the inside of this particular flower was quite hard and daunting because you had lots of these little spikes of lighter colour. So the way that I tackled that is I went in with my lightest colour, which was the light chrome yellow, and I added in all of the different spikes of the yellow that I could see poking up. It takes a little bit of time to look at your reference photo and then translate that to your drawing, but it is completely worth it to use this method. I then went in and added in some darker shadows with some darker oranges on the base of those little yellow things. I'm not quite sure what the technical term is, something to do with stamen or pollen, I don't know. And added in the orange on the bottom because that's where there's a lot more shadow, and then the whole rest of this I just filled in with some darker red tones. So I used some dark red and some madder and some alizarin crimson to fill in all of this area. It was really dark, so I've added in that red as the base because we've got the red from the petals, and then I'm slowly building up to the darker colours, so using some dark red and then eventually using dark indigo and introducing a tiny little bit of dark sepia here and there to really darken up a few areas as well. But it's really important to blend in these yellow sections as well towards the bottom, as I say, because where the bottom of them are is where they're kind of attaching to the base, or this like bit of seed kind of head looking thing here. So I'm making sure that I'm adding in some shadows to the bottom of these yellow sections, making sure that I go over with some of the darker reds and everything as well, and making sure that they really stand out by coming through with some dark indigo around them, so making sure they stand out, but also introducing that shadow as well. So you can see on this whole section on this side that I'm going around each of them with that red pencil and filling in all of this huge kind of vast area, and then going through and adding in different shadows using some dark indigo and dark red, and as I said, eventually that dark sepia as well, to just help to create a little bit of contouring and everything onto this particular area. Now we're going back towards the petals, and we're just following exactly the same pattern as we did for the other ones, outlining initially by using some of the lighter pinks so that we can get that form of the petal, and adding in kind of any initial darker areas on that petal as well. So the underneath is what I've defined on this particular one. That's the bit that I'd wanted to make sure that I didn't lose, so I've added that in with the darker colour straight away, and then just creating the form of the petal by coming through with my mid-tones and then slowly working up to the darker colours. So this particular petal is kind of coming forward at us, so I've left the very tip, the very edge, as the brightest, and I've added in some white around there as well, and then the underneath is going to be a little darker, and then as we go through to the kind of where it's attaching to the petal, I'm adding in those darker colours, and I'm making sure that they kind of taper inwards in like a triangular motion as well, to help the petal kind of form and look as if it's coming out. This is kind of one of the more slightly difficult areas, I think, of this particular thing, because I had to make sure that that petal looked as if it was coming towards you, and the way that you do that is just to taper your colours down into kind of like a triangle shape coming down towards where the petal is attaching to the centre of the flower, if that makes sense. One of the challenges you may face when you're drawing your own flowers and your own petals is trying to create that nice smooth look, and as I mentioned, you want to make sure that you do really layer up your colours, so you're putting loads and loads of different layers. Make sure they're light layers as well so that you can build up more of them. You don't want to go in with a really heavy layer straight away. You can do in places that you do have some darker colour, but in this particular case you want to make sure that you do build up those colours and those layers, make sure they're nice and light, and use a little bit of a circular motion as well when you're blending with your lighter colours or with a white pencil. That's going to really help to create a nice smooth surface, and make sure as well that you add in any of those defining lines and features through the petal, because that's going to help to give the petal a little bit of structure and give it a little bit of more interest as well. So it's really important that when you are drawing petals, flowers, that you don't just leave it as a solid smooth area, because then that's going to look a little bit off. You do want to make sure that you do add a little bit of texture, and you want to make sure that you're adding those lines and texture in the direction that the petal is going, and make sure that you pay attention to your reference for any folds of the petals or kind of any undulations and that kind of thing, because if you're just doing straight lines all in the same direction, that's going to look a little bit too contrived, a little bit stale. So you want to make sure that you do kind of bend your lines to fit the petals, just to keep it looking really nice and natural. This part of the flower in this particular case. This was a dahlia that had obviously these really nice pink petals, but it also had this really nice dark stem, and I really did enjoy this particular part because I just got to use these dark colours. And in this particular case I did go in and I did use hard pressure on my pencils to create the dark colour. So I've used some reds and some blues as a light base to begin with, and then I've just gone in with some really heavy dark indigo and some dark sepia to really get that dark colour. And I think the effect was nice towards the end as well. I've also touched and used a little bit of the white gel pen to add some highlights on that particular stem because it was really nice and like rubbery and shiny, and I think that intention is conveyed by using the white gel pen in this particular case. But anyway, that's it for this tutorial. I really hoped you enjoyed and took some use out of these small tips and everything that I have shared with you. As I said, if you want to follow along with the full thing in real time, it's roughly a 3.5 hour tutorial over on Patreon. The link is in the description, go and check it out. But otherwise, I hope that you can apply these tips to your own work, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Bye!